'Twas down by the glenside I met an old woman, a plucking young nettles. She ne'er saw me coming. I listened a while to the song she was humming. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men. 'Tis 50 long years since I saw the moon beaming on strong manly forms and on eyes with hope gleaming. I see them again, and through all my sad dreaming, glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men. When I was a young man, they're marching and drilling, awoke in the hillside, sounds awesome and thrilling. They loved poor old Ireland, and to die they were willing. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men. Some died by the glenside, some died mid the stranger, and wise men have told us their cause was a failure. They stood by old Ireland and never feared danger. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men. I passed on my way, God be praised that I met her. Be lifelong or short, I shall never forget her. We may have great men, but we'll never have better. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men.
The unveiling of this memorial to the memory of volunteer John Mahany, 6th Battalion, 3rd Tip Brigade of the IRA. It's great to see so many people gathered here today as we remember a heroic young man who paid the ultimate sacrifice for his beliefs, and one who unfortunately had until recently fallen through the cracks of history. We hope here today to breathe new life into John's memory and to preserve his story, so that future generations will understand his sacrifice, will speak his name, and will remember him with pride. To open proceedings, we are going to lay some wreaths in John's memory. So the first wreath will be laid on behalf of the Tipperary Independent Republicans by James Toomey. On behalf of the Independent Dublin Republicans, there will be a wreath laid by Patrick Burke, and we thank the large Dublin contingent who have come down to be with us today. Our next wreath will be laid on behalf of all the local IRA safe house families. Those families locally who, though they had little, gave everything they had to help the volunteers in the struggle for independence. This wreath will be laid by Tommy O'Leary of Gotenbridge. Our next wreath will be laid on behalf of Patrick John English. Patrick John English was a member of the 6th Battalion who died in combat near Urlingford in 1922, and this wreath will be laid by his grandnephew Thomas English of Cahir. To give a little background on John Mahany, I would next call on Kathleen Maloney, a local historian here who has done a huge amount in recent times to uncover some of the facts of John's life.
Thanks for Tom. During the summer, when I met Tom, he was researching the Forgotten Soldier, and he mentioned the name John Mahany. Well, I had never heard of him in my life, but anyway, as time progressed, he was still searching, so I went and had looked up the census, and I must thank everybody to help me with the genealogy part of it. So I just stopped off now. John was born on the 9th of June, 1889. He was the 5th of 12 children born to David and Alice Mahany, nee Maloney. That's per census 1901 and 11. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, the family fell on hard times and had to leave their home just down the road where he came up. The family went across the fields to an old house and later to another local house, all within Castlegrace. John worked as a handyman in the local area. John's father David passed away on June the 18th, 1918 at the age of 69, and his mother was left with 4 children under the age of 21. They already had 12 children, and John was the 5th one of the 12 children. At this point, John was the principal breadwinner. The older family members had left fending for themselves. In 1919, John enrolled in the Irish Republican Army as a private, active service unit, 3rd Tipperary Brigade 6th Battalion Company. He participated in the War of Independence, and after the truce he took part in the Civil War. John was arrested on July the 12th, 1922 at 2 Mile Borris. He was put into Kilkenny military barracks jail and treated inhumanely by his captors. He was transferred to Kilkenny Central Hospital on the 12th of March 1923, and he was finally sent to the poorhouse in Cashel on the 14th of June, where he subsequently died on the 24th of June. The cause of his death was certified by the hospital as abdominal tuberculosis. This broke his mother's heart. She didn't want him to die a pauper. He went into jail a fit and healthy young man. An extract from the mother's letter sent to the Department of Defence, dated the 25th of May 1933 and stamped by the department on receipt of their letter, the 30th of May 1933. The people, this is what she said, the people responsible for his removal from Kilkenny jail served themselves nicely, for if he died in jail, the responsibility would be theirs, but they made sure he would die a pauper, not a hero. Signed applications were made and signed on behalf of his mother and brother, David Jr. When his mother was interviewed after John's death in 1923, she had 2 wholly dependent children with her, and the latter of those was totally invalided since birth. She was getting around with the help of 2 sticks herself, and after his death she had to give up her cottage acre of ground to survive. The locals all knew the family circumstances and John's ill treatment in Kilkenny. John Mahany died in 1923. Records show that John's mother, a brother, applied for a military pension in 1933, the year after its introduction by the Fianna Fáil government. Historical letters available show Dan Green pleading the case of his family to be raised in the Dáil. In 1932, when the new military pension board was set up, various representations were made on her behalf, and even the priest put his name to her cause, outlining the family circumstances. The local Fianna Fáil Cumann signed and wrote to the pension board, and a local man sent a letter to Dan Green on behalf of John's mother and her son David. They were refused the pension on the grounds of the certification of death as written, abdominal tuberculosis in Cashel, and the pension board officials decided the cause of death was not attributed to his military service. A final application made but not sent, as John's mother Alice died on the 31st May 1934. So hence the Mahany quest for a military pension died with John's mother in 1934. Mrs. Mahany's letter received by the Department of Defence in May the 30th, 1933, but for some reason it did not arrive in the Army Pension Branch until the 30th of May 1934 as per the stamp. Mrs. Mahany passed away the next day. So that's the story of John Mahany. So and I would just say a short prayer in their memory, and all those people at that time that died, and families and the mothers and everybody who's suffering. The mothers all suffer bringing them into the world, and often in the world and seeing them too young going out of the world. So I would say Hail Mary. Sheila Bahawira, a tall on across, John Tiernalet is Banaha who either Mana, August is Banaha her Bernisa, and every her a mahar de Gorin, Napeki, and it are our Wusamot, Amen. And then Menachar August and Big August third name. I did a couple of verses of the song, and I'm dedicating this to Alice, who suffered so much, and for all the mothers and all the people who died everywhere, and even in all the wars up to this present day, and who fought in, who were representing us in the armed forces in different countries. So you probably all know this one anyway. It was down by the glen side, I met an old woman, picking young nettles. She ne'er heard me coming. I listened a while to the song she was humming. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men. It's 50 long years since I saw the moon beaming on strong manly forms and eyes with hope gleaming. I see them again in all my sad dreaming. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men. I went on my way, God be praised that I met her. Be life long or short, sure I'll never forget her. We may have brave men, but we'll never have better. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men.
So I just call on Tom Hennessy to give the oration. Thank you.
Walter Road got in it. Liam Lynch and his comrades gave their lives for an Ireland free and separate from England and from the British Empire. What they fought for and the principles for which they died, we stand for today. There could be no peace in Ireland until the connection with England was broken and the Republic restored. That was part of Maurice Moss Toomey's oration at the unveiling of the Liam Lynch Tower on the slopes of the Knockmill Downs behind me. The first video I did of John Mahany's grave, the following evening I got a message from a grandnephew, Mark Fanning, and Mark had hopped on his motorbike, drove the whole way up after seeing the story, and laid the first wreath on John Mahany's grave. And I think he's here, and I just want a big round of applause for doing that. That's real history. So the year was 1935 when the Liam Lynch monument was unveiled, and Maurice had spent the night before in an IRA safe house at the foot of the mountain, one of many IRA safe houses used regularly here in South Tip. The previous day, dawn raids by the guards had failed to find the Chief of Staff of the IRA. Maurice, who like Liam Lynch and many a rebel before him, often hid amongst the hills and glens of Tipperary. Supported by the people here down through the generations, who remain faithful to the cause of Irish freedom, there is a sense of identity here in South Tipperary, a proud Gaelic tradition. Just a few weeks ago, while searching for John Mahany's grave, I was lucky and honoured to have been given a handwritten copy of the oration given in 1913 just up the road from here in Tubred, on the occasion of the unveiling of a plaque to the great Father Geoffrey Keating. Geoffrey Keating was born just a few miles from here at Burgess. This oration was given at the small church where it is said Father Geoffrey Keating is buried, in front of a crowd of thousands. Johanna Marr, a 15-year-old local girl, so interested in her culture, and no doubt proud of local priest Geoffrey, had gone to the trouble of writing it down, not only in English, but Os Gaeilge. Here are a few lines. It had been for long a reproach to the people of Ireland, and especially to the residents of Tubrat, that no fitting monument marked the spot where Dr. Geoffrey Keating laboured as a priest, in the days when law placed the same price on the head of a wolf as on that of a priest. His monumental work, The History of Ireland, and other works will endure and be regarded with veneration, as long as there will be left in Ireland one person who esteems her history and her language. There is an old proverb that declares that a man is never truly dead until the last person who remembers him has finally forgotten. John Mahany, the forgotten soldier, like Geoffrey Keating, deserves for his memory and deeds to live on, never to be forgotten, and should be regarded with veneration, as the speaker said, and as long as there will be left one person who is proud of her history and culture, John Mahany's sacrifice must never be forgotten. John Mahany was educated just beside us here in this building, and I'm sure, although this part of Ireland was occupied at that time, Geoffrey Keating and his life must have cast a long shadow over the district and left a Gaelic legacy which, in my opinion, still can be found in these parts. They say history has a habit of repeating. Through these same Tipperary hills and fields, the British hunted Father Geoffrey. His big crime was trying to save our Gaelic culture and write it down. In 1922, when principled men like John Mahany refused to take an oath of allegiance to a foreign tyrannical king, descendants of the same people carrying the same flag, the butcher's apron, who had hunted Father Keating along the same boreens and fields, were now funding and backing a terror campaign against Irish Republicans being perpetrated by former comrades. On the V Mountain Pass behind us here, when he was making his way for the first time into Tipperary, Oliver Cromwell stopped and, glancing over the fertile plains of Tipperary and Cork, uttered the sentence, "A land worth fighting for." And fight they did. That Cromwellian army, the latest instalment of British tyranny to descend on our Green Isle, butchered, raped, burned, pillaged their way across Munster. In Clonmel a brave stand was made, but when the guns fell silent and the smoke of battle cleared, Cromwell and his henchmen went about their business of terror by breaking up Gaelic families, and at harbours like Youghal and Dungarvan, the wailing and screams of mothers and fathers being dragged away from young ones never to see each other again could be heard as the British ships carried their cargoes of Irish slaves away to Barbados and the West Indies, where an often short life of slavery and torture awaited them. Some were sent to the west with to Hell or to Connacht, their lands and possessions divided out to planters and those loyal to the crown. Here locally, just a couple of miles from here, James Butler lived in Ruska Castle. He joined the fight against the British invaders at Fethard. He was caught, and on a May morning in Clonmel was hung for his patriotism. And here today, let that sink in, as we talk about moving on and new relations with a country whose army is still occupying part of our island. These atrocities were not just one-offs. In every generation, our nation has had to endure English tyranny and terrorism in our land. The fields around here were regularly crossed by the men of the White Boy movement, which was first formed only a few miles from here at Garrymore. They were formed to rebel against British misrule and native land grabbers. In Shanran Cemetery, just outside Clogheen, the great patriot priest, Father Sheehy, is buried. He stood with his people against the tyranny that was being inflicted on them. The local loyalists and planters, whom had been installed by the plantation, the Bagwells, Mauds, and other descendants of Cromwell's soldiers, didn't like the fact that a priest was starting to lead his parishioners and stand against their tyranny. They eventually got him on trumped up charges and with paid perjurers. On the 15th of March 1766, Father Sheehy was hung, drawn and quartered, and his head was placed on a spike opposite where St. Peter and Paul's Church stands today in Clonmel. Not content with that, in a final act of depravity, his headless body was dragged by the legs up O'Connell Street. This was done to ensure the natives were terrorised, and British rule in this country, and indeed throughout the world, has always been based on that, inflicting terror on the natives. Sean Tracy listed the execution of Father Sheehy as a national event that influenced him. The genocide, known by sensible Ireland as the famine, would have still been spoken of and stories handed down when John Mahany was a young man. No famine occurred along our boreens. Food was plenty, but Trevelyan and the Crown made sure the coffers of their planted landlords continued to grow. Shiploads of food was exported, with barges of barley leaving Clonmel for Waterford under British Army Guard, while hunger stalked the land. The landlord class evicted as hard as they could, and the hirelings of the RIC and British Army made sure the King of England's law was enforced, while children starved and the cries of tortured parents echoed throughout our land as they were dragged from homes and the dead piled up in hidden glens and along boreens. We stand here today in a special county and in a proud Republican part of it. Generations of men and women all along these lovely boreens have rebelled against foreign misrule. Where Tipperary leads, Ireland follows, so wrote John Mitchell, the young Irelander. Tipperary has always been involved in the ancient fight in pursuit of freedom. The 32-county Irish Republic, which John Mahany died for, and their 1916 leaders gave their lives for. On Slievenamon, the Fenians met in 1798, keeping the flame of Fenianism glowing in Tipperary. In 1848, Tipperary men were again to the forefront, Charles Kickham and John O'Leary leading figures. In 1867 at Ballyhurst, the Tipperary Fenians, led by General Burke of Fethard and J.J. Miles Finnan of Ardevillain, made their stand against the ancient enemy. Russell was killed, and our plaque to John Mahany carries a quotation from a poem written by J.J. Miles about young Russell, and so the tradition continued of Tipperary men rebelling against English tyranny. It is no coincidence that every second grave here in Duhall, Ballyluby, Shanrahan and in most of the adjoining parishes are graves of men and women who, when tyranny stalked this part of our lovely land, they answered the call and made a stand in whatever way they could. Dr. Tim Horgan, speaking at the unveiling of our Sean Hogan monument last year, said it all when he said, "These young men were born to hold a pen, a shovel or a hurley, but not a gun. However, a century ago, their country called, and rifles sloped uneasily on their shoulders. These men began their march, oblivious of the danger they faced. If freedom had a price, they would pay it." The local active service units of the IRA were set up throughout Tipperary and other parts of Ireland, and these were the men who took part in operations local to them against the illegal occupier Britain and the hirelings of the RIC, who were the eyes and ears of the British in every county. John Mahany was in the Republican movement here from the very start and took part in all activities. The Grey Company was involved in numerous operations of significance here locally, including a firefight in Ardfinnan on Easter Sunday 1921, where they helped Sean Hogan's column escape from a roundup. The Gary Moore or Highlands Cross ambush, where they took part with Dinny Lacey's and Sean Hogan's columns. The burning of Tubred House and the raid on the enemy mansion at Castlegrace, just a short distance from here. The Tipperary IRA fought hard all along these fields and hills and drove the British Army from Tipperary. No more would the butcher's apron float over our towns and villages. When the British decided it would be better to give the Irish a degree of self-rule, and after 800 years they knew us well, they knew there would be some who would put power and wealth before principle, and so Tan terror was replaced by Free State terror, armed by their British paymasters and supported by the Anglo elite who were still clinging to power and containing many British Army recruits and other trucers that had stood idly by during the previous 2 years, while great men like John Mahany had brought the war to the British and fought them out of the hills and glens of Tipperary. This new army, wearing dyed British uniforms, clasping British weapons, a paid army, and like the Cromwellian mercenaries who years before had come over the Vee, this army too descended on our lovely valley and attempted to crush republicanism. We know that John Mahany, like the majority of his comrades here in the 6th Battalion area, opposed the Treaty of Surrender. And when Dinny Lacey and Bill Quirk began organising to again stand against tyranny, John Mahany was a proud member of an anti-treaty flying column which included many locals. The column was led by David Moher of Mitchelstown, and one of their first engagements was the taking of the RIC barracks in Urlingford. On the 8th of July, John Mahany fought alongside his fellow 6th Battalion comrade Patrick John English at Longford Pass near Mary Willie's pub. Patrick English gave his life that day for Ireland, and his headstone reads, Patrick English, who was killed in battle for Ireland's cause. A few days later, on the 15th of July at 2 Mile Borris, John Mahany, along with his commanding officer and 12 more IRA men, were captured by Free State forces. Held in Thurles for a few days, they were then transferred to Kilkenny jail. John Mahany walked through the front gates of Kilkenny prison, a healthy 32-year-old soldier of the Irish Republican Army. His horrendous treatment in that hellhole meant he would never come out alive. When the guns fell silent here in Tipperary, there were a lot of great young IRA men who stood by the Republic proclaimed in 1916, all patriots lying in freshly dug graves. Alice Mahony, in a letter written in the 30s to the Pension Application Board, writes some of the most poignant lines I've ever read in my life. The people responsible for his removal from Kilkenny jail saved themselves nicely, for if he died in jail, the responsibility would be theirs. But they made sure he died a pauper, not a hero. We know that John Mahany was well thought of by his comrades, and his pension application is full of praise for this soldier of Ireland, including from Dan Breen. And so, we stand here, 100 years after Dennis Luby stood over there and fired 3 volleys of shots over John Mahany's grave. Dennis Luby recounted John's funeral in a letter outlining his activities. One man of the battalion died in prison. When his funeral arrived in Dole Cemetery, I fired 3 volleys over his grave, for which I was arrested a few days later. He was arrested for honouring his fallen comrade and for taking part in the traditional Republican funeral. And wasn't that act of defiance by Dennis Luby, who probably knew he would face consequences, possibly dire, a brave one? A final salute. Many like John Mahany were forgotten about, their sad, horrendous stories covered up by the powers that be, while other men who were willing to swear allegiance to a foreign king fumbled and jostled for power in the new Ireland. Great patriots like John Mahany lay in graveyards like Dull throughout the 32 counties, often without their names carved in stone. The Ireland that John and his comrades fought for has still to be realised. Today in Ireland, revisionism is alive and well. It's easy to campaign against human rights in distant lands and talk of other nations' sovereignty, while 6 of our counties remain occupied. Today, in those counties, there are Irish men and women in British-controlled prison cells. This is a direct result of our country's colonial history. The Anglicisation of our country continues, with political leaders jostling to get pictures and shake hands with foreign monarchs, whose army is still camped above in 6 of our Irish counties. Treating these foreign monarchs as somehow worthy of adulation. For what? Is it murder and mayhem and generations of Irish lives ruined? In the 30s, the prefix old was placed in front of IRA. So-called Republicans began to say the old IRA were different. In Tipperary, George Plant went to an early grave, a proud IRA man, literally shot down by former Republicans. Great South Tip Republicans such as Ned Carrigan, Bill Lundergan, and the recently deceased Tom O'Sullivan continued to fly the flag and be proud of what they believed in. To say that the men like John Mahany who fought the occupying Crown forces along these hills and fields were somehow different to the men of East Tyrone or South Armagh who went out during the last phase of the struggle for Irish freedom to face the same army is totally hypocritical.
Hear, hear.
I believe in the fullness of time, and when history records it, when they write Robert Emmet's epitaph, all these great IRA heroes of men will be revered. You cannot put an idea up against the wall and shoot it. It has taken 100 years, but today a martyr is being recognised and his name resurrected. And when future generations see this plaque and read his name, they will know that a brave man called John Mahany made a stand for freedom and gave his life in pursuit of a 32-county Irish Republic. That a great generation of Irish men and women took on a tyrannical empire here in the Galtv Valley. That brave men of the local active service unit of the IRA gave their all to try free all our country. A man is never truly dead until the last person who remembers him has finally forgotten. John Mahany, you are a hero and will never more be forgotten. Berbua.
Run! Easy, the run again! Run! I knew them run again!
Well, thank you very much to Paddy for that. I think if that wouldn't put the hairs rising on the back of your neck, nothing will. So thank you. Before we finish, Tom, in addition to his many talents as a historian and an orator, which we've seen today, also has turned his hand towards poetry. So it's probably fitting that I'll finish with a couple of lines from Tom's poem, The Fighting Men from Graig. So sometimes when I wander now down that old boreen at dusk, I see their shadows moving over fields from Bornagore. I hear Sean Hogan whisper in the flowing waters of the Tar, and the rebel sound of fighting men echoing along the vale. The loft it is still standing where the column used to stay, the old home now abandoned to the wild grass and the clay. The boys, they gave it everything, but alas their dream was not to be. 32 counties for the Irish, for the Gaelic and the free. Thank you.
'Twas down by the glenside I met an old woman, a plucking young nettles. She ne'er saw me coming. I listened a while to the song she was humming. Glory-o, glory-o, to the bold Fenian men.